You may be surprised to know that there were black slave owners in the United States of America. So I'm going to read this Reddit question, and then I'm going to look at some of this person's answer. They did a pretty good job. I've seen several conservative commentators claim that black slave owners existed. They made a significant portion uh, of the slave owning class, and that the first person to own slaves in the colonies was black. Are any of these claims true? Now, this person, they put some good information here, so we're just going to pull out some key points. Let me see, it's a reading called First Was Negro Owners of Slaves in 1830, Free Black Owners of Slaves, a reappraisal of the Woodson Thesis, Were African American Slaveholders Benevolent or Exploitative, a Quantitative Approach. So it's interesting. So let's take a look. The latter two studies mostly support the conclusions reached by Woodson. All right, in particular, argue that Woodson may have been a bit conservative with his numbers. Okay, let's look further. Regardless, the ownership of humans by free black Americans was not all that widespread, according to the Halliburton study. So we can believe that, right? But my point in going here is not to say that it was widespread, because we know that the majority of the slaveholders in America were Caucasian. However, the fact remains that this does not match those so-called curses in Deuteronomy 28, where they say no man shall buy you. So let's pretend that the word buy only means redeem in verse 68. Let's read this. There were about 3,775 black slaveholders in the United States at their peak in 1830, owning about 12,000 enslaved black people. This represents about 0.5% of all enslaved people in the United States. Though the percentage is small, that's still 12,000 people, right? Being owned by a black slaveholder. But you Israelites said in Deuteronomy 28 that we would have no power and no might in our hand to defend ourselves, to do anything. Looked like we had some power here. That's 12,000 people. Let's continue. Might not have been that much power, but it was some power. All right, what part of the curses is this? Let's look here. Of them, about 42% owned one enslaved person. So this makes sense because look, typically owning, quote unquote, either a spouse or a child. All right, so if you buy your wife or your child so that they can be free, even though legally they're listed as your property, that makes sense. That's not real slavery, okay? So we're not gonna act like they were being mean to everybody that they enslaved. But this is the point. That's called redemption. So when it says no man shall buy you, and you said that it means no man shall redeem you in Deuteronomy 28:68, this is showing you that some redemption was happening. That is, a black person bought their freedom from a slaveholder. See? They redeemed themselves, then bought the freedom of a family member. They generally did not pay to emancipate the person they quote unquote bought because it was expensive and the slave states made it difficult. But nonetheless, they bought their freedom where they could live free away from that slave master. You see? Of the 3,775 total black slaveholders, about half of them lived in cities. They were not engaged in agricultural plantation or plantation work. Let's see, let's skip on down. You got a lot of stats here. It says here, the percentage of such slave owners was between 19% to 27% of all black slave owners, right? Which translates to about 1,000 total such slave owners. But of them, these 1,000 individuals held about 2/3 of all enslaved people held by black slave owners in 1830. Expressed in percentages, about 0.5% of all exploitative slave owners. It means commercial. It means doing the same thing to black people that the white man did, were black. So you did have black slave owners who were selling black people just like the white people were doing. Let's see how many it was. Put another way, at the peak, there were around 1,000 black slave owners who were exploitative commercial slave owners owning about 8,000 enslaved people. At the same time, according to Leitner and Reagan, there were about 224,000 white slave owners who were also exploitative, obviously, right? And owned the remainder of the 2 million enslaved people in the U.S. in 1830. So we know that 2 million enslaved people is way more than 8,000. However, this is still 8,000 enslaved people that are being owned by blacks. But you Israelites said that Deuteronomy 28 said we're cursed and we don't have the power to redeem ourselves. So I'm going to ask you this question. Because anybody that's seen my recent videos talking about the false doctrine of Deuteronomy 28, you'll know why I'm going in on this. If you haven't seen it, just look on the channel. It'll be the ones before this video. How do Negroes commercially enslave 8,000 enslaved people and then benevolently purchase the freedom of 4,000 slaves so they can be free? So they freed 4,000 of our people from slavery through self-redemption, buying their children and their spouses out of slavery, and then the other 8,000 being enslaved commercially. So that's called a man being able to buy you and redeem you. So no matter how you interpret Deuteronomy 28:68, whether you interpret the word buy, I'm not even going to pull up the scripture now because you know what it is. If buy means purchase, well, we were making the purchases. If buy means redeem, we were redeeming ourselves and one another. That means that curse does not fit so-called Negroes in the United States the way you told us it did. And we definitely have no record of us eating our children during slavery over here, like it's written in Deuteronomy 28, verses 52 through 57. So, I appreciate your time. I hope this video has been informative. Like, share, or subscribe if you appreciate this content, or leave any questions or comments you may have in the comments section below.